Big bash in New Taipei's Ban Chao. So, Jane, what's happening there at the moment?
Well, I have been staying here since 3 p.m. and supporters, in the early hours, supporters kept coming in and waving flags and waiting anxiously for the results. But now there are still empty seats to be filled, and so obviously people have seen, especially Ho's supporters have seen the partial results of this election, and according to Ho's staff workers here, they say that Ho will probably show up after 8 p.m. And some of his government, the New Taipei government workers are already here, but not Ho. And Ho will appear together with the KMT chair, Zhu Lilun.
And what about the legislative election? What are people there thinking about that?
Oh, this is interesting. I've just talked with the KMT legislator, Zeng Mingzong. He came here, and he said that they are looking at the KMT becoming the majority in the legislative yuan because they have already secured about 53 or 54 seats right now, and they're still waiting for the results of several other seats. But as we know, there are altogether 113 seats in the legislative yuan. So the majority would be 57. So the KMT is only like 2 or 3 seats shy of the majority. And Zeng Mingzong says for this time around, for the current, the China administration, the legislative yuan is the biggest majority, and the function of the legislative yuan to check and balance the administration is just almost totally failed. And Zeng Mingzong says that he believes that for the next administration, probably the Lai Ching-te administration, the legislative yuan would play a much more important and pivotal role.
So they're partly despondent at the KMT rally headquarters, but partially happy. It's happy and sadness going on there at the moment, we could say.
Exactly, especially if you take a look at what's happening in Taipei Shi right now. There are several very strong candidates like Xu Xiaoxin. She's leading Xu Shuhua, her DP2 rival, by a wide margin, and so is Wang Hongwei. Well, Wang Hongwei is leading Xie Peifeng, but not by a big gap. Wang Hongwei and Xu Xiaoxin, they are both very strong candidates. They are outspoken, and they often would reveal some of the maybe like scandals or the things that the ruling party has done that's it's something that the general public not aware of. So, and also Luo Zhiqiang is another very strong Taipei councillor, and he's leading the Shemingdang and the Social Democratic Party candidate Miao Boya. So with all three of them, Wang Hongwei, Xu Xiaoxin, and Luo Zhiqiang, I think the KMT legislators in the next legislative session should perform quite well.
Right, thanks a lot for that, Jane. And of course, we'll be speaking to you later this evening. And we're going to go to the Taiwan People's Party headquarters now, where Hope Go is waiting for us. Hope, what's it like there now? Do we have
concert going? I don't know if you can hear me very clearly, but we've got a lot of music and a lot of people singing in the background right now. People have started gathering here at about 4 o'clock this afternoon, and the place is full, although it's not completely packed. We're about a stone's throw away from the Icrt studios in Xinjiang. There are hundreds of TPP supporters that have been here. And when I got here at about 6 p.m., they were already sounding a dirge almost to say that, they were close to giving up, but they were saying that they could still consider the performance a victory of sorts because they could show the results. The numbers were showing that a third party could do well and could break the barrier of having just the two-party system within Taiwan. Kevin?
Well, what are they thinking? Are they thinking that maybe Ing-wen now has to deal with the DPP?
They haven't said anything like that. They spent a little bit of time showing the results from the legislative yuan elections, but they've pivoted away from that since. And there's been a lot of music and a lot of, I would tend to say, trying to keep people's spirits up. One of his supporters has told me that they expect to see him on stage at about 7:30, but he couldn't. I wouldn't hang my hat on that because he said he wasn't sure.
Right, well, we're getting a bit loud there now, Hope, so we'll talk to you a bit later this evening, okay? Thanks,
We
thanks for
will
that.
indeed. Take care.
So, Martin, what do we have here at the moment? It looks like he's running away with it now. DPP, Leichinger.
Well, the numbers that we're getting across different television sources have William Lai averaging 40% of the vote, which is that magical number that's ascribed to the DPP base and has been for many years. The fact that he's got up to 40% is interesting because, of course, in the opinion polling for so long, he barely got about 35. But, as I used to try to say to people at the time, when you look at those opinion polls and you take into account people who do not choose a candidate or those who don't turn up to vote, when you adjust those votes accordingly, it takes the DPP up to 40%, and that's exactly where they are. So the polling, for the DPP at least, has been quite accurate, it appears. In any case, it's a fairly solid win for William Lai tonight. He's up over the KMT by about 7 points. He's above the Taiwan People's Party by about 13 or 14 points, although the numbers are still varying. But we've got about how much have we got? About 10 million votes counted. We don't know what the turnout is yet, but the turnout last year I think was 4 years ago was 13 or 14 million. So it looks like it's going to be less than that this time. Well down. But really, it's under the circumstances, it's a fairly famous victory for William Lai tonight. But the DPP is being chastened in the legislature. They will lose control of the legislature. I'm not as negative as your correspondent there was about positive, I should say, as the correspondent was there about the KMT's future in the legislature at this point. The DPP, according to some projections, still have a 7-seat lead over the KMT in the local electorates, and they are also at least 3% ahead in the party vote, which means they gain a vote against the KMT compared to 4 years ago.
And I'm joined this hour by Ross Feingold, regular commentator. Ross, what are you taking away from what you're looking at now?
It's certainly looking better than some of the polls had indicated, so that's a strong result from that perspective for President-elect Lai. Should we be calling him President-elect, Gavin?
Let's wait a bit for that, shall we?
If he could break 40%, it sounds a lot better than being elected with something less than that. But there's the sobering aspect that it's far less than President Tsai got on her successful re-election in 2020.
I think we could argue the fact that there's two main opposition parties running, though, Ross, for that one.
Yes, but it's going to take some time to figure out why so many people deserted the DPP versus 4 years ago, although it looks like, as of now, it's enough to win the election, but they still lost a lot of votes.
And Ross, I'll throw it in there because I can. Do you think if Kerr and Ho had managed to form a partnership, we could be looking at very, very different numbers?
I think that's fair to say. It would have been close, but all the data indicates that the non-DPP vote was greater than the DPP. Than the DPP vote.
Martin.
Yeah, there are still a lot of legislative races that are yet to be called, and there are some interesting and predictable ones. But I just want to point out for those listeners in Taipei, of which there are quite a few, I'm sure, that it appears that the DPP has won Freddie Lim's old seat in what was a very competitive election between the DPP, the KMT, and the TV personality Yu who ran as an independent. And it appears that the DPP have recovered that seat. It's just looking at it here, Taipei 5. Wu Pei, it appears, will be elected in Taipei 5, taking it off the independent. And that will make up for the loss of a seat in Taipei. So it's status quo in Taipei, Gavin, and that's probably a fairly instructive development considering everything else. Considering everything else that's happening tonight. One other quick point: it appears that the DPP have got a complete lock on all seats south of Jianghua. They have not lost a single seat south of the Zhuoshui River. And not only that, they've got back their independent seat in Pingdong that they lost 4 years ago. So the DPP has got the southern half of Taiwan firmly in its grip. And in that regard, the party has done quite well. And it may well just explain why people weren't so excited down south, knowing that it was a very, very stable situation down there politically.
And on the phone now, we've got Wild Bill Stanton, the former head of the Taiwan American Institute in Taiwan. Bill, how are you? You're watching the election, Bill?
Sure am. There are a whole bunch of people here from the U.S. delegation, led by Steve Yates and other people here watching the results. And I have to say, overall, I guess because from an American perspective, everybody's happy that the DPP has a great victory, it looks like, given how much pessimism there was going into the election that looked like Yo-Yo Lee and Ko Wen-je, first of all in combination and then separately, they looked like they might have a better showing. So I think everybody's in this group that I'm sitting with, very happy with these results. As I say, particularly because it bodes well for the US-Taiwan relationship. We haven't seen the other shoe drop on the other side of the strait, though, so there's, a little bit of concern about what's going to happen on that front. It makes you wonder, it's already been pointed out, if somehow Ko Wen-je and Yo-Yo Lee had reached some sort of compromise, looks like they would have, they had enough votes, but it's hard to say. If it were just a one-on-one election, it might have been a lot of those votes, some of those votes for sure would have also gone to Lai Ching-te. So, but I think it's a good night. It's a good election, and people are pretty happy with the results.
So, Martin, we've got Bill on the phone there saying that his group is happy.
Yeah, hi, Bill. It's Martin Williams here. I was just curious. So that there's been some talk in various outlets about the possibility of the DPP getting less than 40% of the vote, having some reflection on the party's mandate to rule. It appears they're going to just get over 40% at this point. But in any case, would that have been a valid point, or is there another way you would look at it?
Well, I would look at it from the point of view that all you need is a plurality of votes, and you win. And the fact is that there were more people who liked Lai Ching-te than liked the other two candidates together. So, I know. I think it's a valid election result. Winning is winning, and I think that's the way we have to look at it.
And I have to ask you, Bill, why was the group of people you're with so waiting for the DPP to win again?
Well, I think because they're all people who have worked hard over the years on the US-Taiwan relationship. And I think that both Yo-Yo Lee and Ko Wen-je seemed less enthusiastic. I mean, I guess it was Ko Wen-je who said that Taiwan should be a bridge from China to the U.S. That's not a comfortable description, I think, for the U.S. So I think we are very happy that we're going to have somebody who is more enthusiastic about the relationship with the U.S. rather than somebody who's going to be a bridge or part of a bridge for the Taiwan government. This group representing people from the United States, both Taiwanese Americans and just straight-up Americans, are pretty happy with the results tonight.
Well, I have to ask you, what is their problem with the KMT?
Well, I think, going back to the days of Ma Ying-jeou, when I was the AIT director, there's never been as strong an enthusiasm about building relations with the U.S. It was sort of maybe a given. And then more recently, we saw Ma Ying-jeou basically saying Taiwan needs to be supine before Beijing. And I think that didn't go over very well with Americans viewing of the KMT. That we, have to pay obeisance somehow to that relationship. So, it's understandable that people would be enthusiastic about this result.
But do you think people in Taiwan should be concerned about the upcoming American election?
Well, sure, yeah. Absolutely. We're all concerned about that as well because it's clear that we know on the one hand we have a current president who's, actually 4 times said that he would come to the defense of Taiwan. And we have less assurance coming from his likely future opponent. So I think Washington has to be, at least, part of Washington is going to be very happy with the result as well.
And what are the people you're with now going to take back to Washington and tell officials in Washington?
Well, I think, they're going to have a series of meetings while they're here, but I think they're all going to go away feeling very happy with the results. And these are all people who believe in building a relationship between the United States and Taiwan. So they're going to feel reinforced and reinvigorated by this visit.
And Ross Feingold's in the studio now, Bill. And Ross, I've got a question for you.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that the Biden administration wanted Lai to win, as did these other Americans that are here watching the election. So, Bill, I'm not going to ask whether or not. I'm just going to ask how big will the Lai administration be betting on a Trump victory?
I don't know. At this point, I think they've been so absorbed with their own election victory. I think as time goes on, we'll see. I think there will be more concern if Biden loses or his opponent wins, rather. Simply because it's there's not as much assurance about the direction of the relationship. As we know, for example, recently, Mr. Trump has said, for example, that Taiwan stole microchips from Taiwan, a charge that I think has no basis whatsoever. And so I think, there'll be more concerned should the opponent win against Mr. Biden.
And going back to Taiwan-US relations currently, right this second, do you think defense officials in America are getting ready to do anything in the coming days?
Is that directed at me?
Yes, directed at you, Bill.
I don't imagine so. I mean, what you mean is they're preparing a gift certificate of some kind. I doubt that very much. Washington has its own preoccupations these days. But I think generally, I would imagine the White House and, will be looking on this victory as, a victory they're enthusiastic about.
But could they be showing this enthusiasm by maybe delivering some of these delayed weapons, platforms and systems to Taiwan?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a real problem. We have weapon systems that since 2019 that have not been delivered. And, I guess a lot of that is due now to the preoccupation also with what's going on in Ukraine, which is an active war. But I think there have been recent indications that certainly the U.S. and the Congress are both concerned about Taiwan and are trying to move forward with those weapons sales.
Right, thanks a lot, Bill. I'll let you get back to your party.
Thanks so
Good
much.
to speak to you, yes. So, Ross,
thank you.
Well, what do you think of Bill Stanton's comments there, yeah?
Well, I guess I'm going to have to disagree with Bill because I think that the Lai administration is going to be making a huge bet on a Trump victory. The Biden administration is probably or definitely happy with this result because they want a government that's fairly tough on China to be governing here in Taiwan. But on the other hand, the Lai administration wants a government in Washington that is also tough on China. And if there has to be a choice between a Biden administration and a Trump administration as far as who's tougher on China, obviously it's going to be the next Trump administration should Trump win the election this November in the United States. So I think the anti-China and the tough on China crowd would be Lai, and it looks like he won, and it would be Trump, who might win. The polls show that he's ahead. But I definitely think that the signals from the Lai administration are going to be that they hope for a Trump victory.
And we'll have to take a short break now, but after the break we'll be hearing what Martin believes the Australian government is thinking at the moment about the Taiwan election.
You're listening to Icrit's election night coverage with expert commentary, breaking news, and live updates from across Taiwan.
谁是未来的执政者？哪些人将进入立法院？继续和 Icrt 回到总统立委大选特别报道。
And welcome back to our election coverage. And we're going to go back to Martin. So, Martin, is Canberra watching today's election with bated breath, or are they at the footy match?
I know, definitely watching with bated breath. Being the cricket season down there, I suspect they're more interested in some of the cricket matches between Australia and various Commonwealth countries or former Commonwealth countries. The Australian government has tended to be far more circumspect about its relations with Taiwan than the US government for obvious reasons, in that the US government obviously has many more direct interests here. But Taiwan remains a very, very important trade partner for Australia. I believe that a very significant proportion of Taiwan's energy supply comes from Australian products. It's something not to be sneezed at. The Australian government, however, does have, certainly compared to the US, it has a much more sensitive, I think in proportion, a much more sensitive issue involving Chinese reaction to its comments regarding Taiwan. As a sort of a pro-Taiwan Australian, I suppose you could say, I've often been disappointed at the silence that comes out of Canberra oftentimes when it comes to events in Taiwan. Although we can expect the Australian representative in Taiwan to congratulate the winner of this election, as the Australian representative always does. When it comes to wider issues involving Australian policy, these things are usually kept behind closed doors, and you often have to go and speak to experts in academia and think tanks to get an understanding of where the government might be. By and large, however, I'm afraid Australia, at least in Taiwan, in the Taiwan context, tends to consider itself a fairly small target, and therefore it's probably of more interest for listeners to understand what the United States is thinking, and also, quite importantly, what Japan is thinking.
And Ross, obviously you're not Japanese, but I mean, what do you think Tokyo is thinking at the moment?
Same thing Washington, D.C. is, that they're happy that Lai won, because for the current Japanese government, they want a government in Taiwan that will be a team player when it comes to China-related initiatives. So I certainly don't think that Japan was rooting for either Hoyoi or Ko En-je to win. So I think the government in Japan is very, very happy with this result.
And let's throw it to you, Europe, Ross. What do you think they're thinking about in Europe?
Well, Europe, they sometimes struggle with how tough on China they're going to be versus maintaining the very important trade relationships, and they don't want to wind up like Australia, which had its wine and other exports to China being banned because of policy decisions or comments made by the Australian government. The European Union doesn't want to put itself in a position where that might happen to European exports or European investments in China. So they definitely struggle. They're probably more the group that wants temperatures to be lowered, whereas again, I think the U.S. and especially if Trump wins, and Australia are generally happy with, and definitely Japan are definitely happy with a government in Taiwan that is more tough on China.
And of course, Martin, we could be saying bye-bye to the Icrt deal as we speak.
Oh, look, a bit of ancient history here. When the Icrt deal was signed, I was in Chongqing with the media delegation along with the Straits Exchange Foundation to witness that deal being done. Back in those days, of course, Bo Xilai hadn't been persecuted yet, and he was the star of the show. And one thing that sort of impressed itself upon me in the years that followed was the inability of the two governments to actually agree on the full text of the deal. Even though the insurance aspect of it, insurance funding and so on, was never really properly entertained by the Chinese government. They could have easily done so. It would have been a much more integrative and productive way of dealing with the then KMT government. To what extent the Icrt deal can be salvaged in this or previous form, I find that hard to say. But on the Icrt situation, as in so many other ways, we see an enormous amount of goodwill coming from Taiwan and increasingly sparse amounts of goodwill coming out of China.
And Ross, the Icrt deal, bye-bye.
A lot of things might be bye-bye. I would put Icrt in the bag of options that China has to show its displeasure with the Lai administration, because we have to keep in mind the Lai administration, I don't say this to be critical, I think I'm just being realistic. The Lai administration will do things that China doesn't like, or they'll say things that China doesn't like. That might be some joint initiative with the United States. or something related to Taiwan's participation in international organizations, et cetera, or something related to domestic policy, finally take down the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Hall and stuff like that. So China's going to do the usual things. It's going to persuade a country or two to switch its diplomatic relations to China from Taiwan. They're going to do military exercises, and they might cancel the ECFA and then replace it with unilateral options for Taiwan companies investing in China, which China could do. They don't need to have this bilateral agreement to offer preferential treatment to companies from Taiwan. So I would just put ECFA on that list of options that China has when they want to use them to show their displeasure with the Lai government.
And Ross, do you see Beijing stepping up its contacting local regional governments?
That's an interesting question as well, because obviously the Kuomintang, Chinese Nationalist Party, they did very well in the 2022 local government elections. So they do have a majority of the mayorships or county commissioner positions. But there's a limit to how much those officials could do vis-a-vis China. They could try and promote agricultural exports. That's something they usually do. Promote inbound tourism, but then the central government has some say so in the Taiwan central government has some say in inbound tourism from China as well. So there's the potential for interaction, but there's a ceiling to what that relationship can achieve. And also keep in mind that the Lai administration would be extremely publicly critical of that kind of subnational diplomacy, for lack of a better word.
So, Martin, I think we can read a headline in the coming weeks saying government has plans ready to help manufacturers diversify their markets.
Well, I hope Ross would agree that the record over the last 4 years has shown a certain amount of success in that diversification process in India and in Southeast Asia, and there's nothing better for a policy than a reward and justification, and for increased money flow, and economically Taiwan is quite healthy. The stewardship of the DPP government over the last 8 years has been more than adequate, and there's no reason for William Lai to change those policies. It might require some finessing. There may be other factors at play, and there are geopolitical aspects that we can't predict. But overall, it appears it's going in the same direction.
We have to keep in mind that the mainland is still the largest export market for Taiwan, even if numbers have grown, whether for exports from Taiwan or outbound investment by Taiwan companies. And yes, they've expanded outbound investment to India substantially in recent years because Apple told its supply chain, Foxconn, and the supply chain that follows Foxconn, that they wanted to manufacture more in India. But going forward, will the position that China has as the number one export destination for Taiwan change? Tough, really, really tough. It's still, for so many reasons, proximity, language, etc. It's still the best export destination for Taiwan companies.
But isn't it safe to say we wouldn't even be discussing this in a way if for gratuitous reasons the Chinese government had not made the business environment domestically more difficult for Taiwanese companies over years?
I'm not sure if it's more difficult. The operating environment in China has always been difficult, and if we consider Taiwan companies to be foreign companies in China, which the Chinese government does not, put them in their own classification, but whether it's U.S. companies or European companies, Australian companies, or Taiwan companies, they all have to deal with a very challenging operating environment. But people from Taiwan could deal with that because of cultural reasons and obviously language and proximity. So they do have some advantages operating in China. Even Foxconn Honhai in recent weeks announced some large investments and expansions in Henan. So Taiwan companies, I'd be cautious about assuming they're going to flee from China in the coming 4 years, but I'm sure the Lai administration is going to encourage them to flee.
Now, news has just flashed across the screen that says Lai Ching-te is going to take to the stage at the DPP Happy Party at 8:30. But reporting from that said Happy Party in Taipei, we now have Jimmy Zhuang on the phone. Jimmy, what's happening there at the moment? It's a bit noisy. Can you hear me amongst the noise, Jimmy?
Yes, I'm here.
And
yes.
what is happening? I guess people are happy and not sad, to put it as basic as you can put it.
Well, they're absolutely happy because according to the latest statistics by the Central Commission, Election Commission, William Lai and Bi-khim are leading with 3.9 million votes, and Hou You-yi and Cao Cao-kang they have 3.1 million votes, and of course TPP's Ko Wen-je and Cynthia Wu have 2.4. And at the TPP headquarters as of now, Bi-khim arrived at 6 p.m. and William Lai arrived at 6:30, and now they are gearing up for the international press conference and call it a night at 8:30. But we are expecting what the new president, the elect, will say, because out of 8 constituencies for the legislature election, the DPP candidates are only leading in 3 of them, and definitely the majority at the legislature will be the KMT in the future when he becomes the president. We're looking forward to what he will be saying.
And we'll get back to you later in the evening, Jimmy. But now we've got ICRT's Michael Smith. He spoke to a voter earlier who travelled back from overseas to cast her vote.
We fly from Southern California.
And why are you here voting for Lai?
We think that his policy of insisting that Taiwan being a country is actually good for the people.
Some people are arguing that there isn't as much enthusiasm this time around as there was before. Do you feel that way?
Actually, on the way back from Taipei to here, trains are crowded. So I don't really know why. Maybe people are thinking that a lot of people are working and they can't really make it. But actually, I think from the traffic, I think it's actually very energetic. There's a lot of fire-up spirits, and yes.
So last time, 4 years ago, Hangul was very disliked by many people in the South. What do you feel about the main contender, Hou You-yi? What feelings do you have about him?
He is the mayor of the new Taipei city, so he's definitely experienced in administration. But we think the whole KMT party didn't really insist on Taiwan being a country, and their way of being pissed off to China too much is a little bit a dangerous move, given the fact that China is having a lot of trouble domestically, let alone their bad human rights record.
Thank you.
And that was Michael Smith reporting from Kaohsiung. So, Ross, it does look like he's won, that being Lai Ching-te. And do you see, obviously, Tsai Ing-wen has had a flurry of visitors from overseas during her tenure in office. Do you see Lai Ching-te having an equal number of visitors? Or do you think maybe Tsai Ing-wen was a bit more fashionable than Lai Ching-te, we'll say, if you use a word?
Well, I would think the Lai Xiao tandem as president and vice president are going to double down on that strategy, right? They've wanted to internationalize questions related to Taiwan, its status, its security. And this is something that really picked up before the 2022 local election and then continued throughout this year. And we even saw that in some of the campaign slogans or advertising. They talked about the world's Taiwan became the kind of key word or the description that the DPP started to use, and that worked successfully for them with this victory. But to maintain that, I think you have to double down. So I think that they're going to look for more of that in the Lai administration. You got to work at it, right? So those little things like joint statements when the president of the United States has a bilateral meeting with the leader of another country, whether it's Japan, Korea, European countries, elsewhere, where they have these joint statements that cover a long, long list of different issues: North Korea, Iran's nuclear program, obviously the Middle East war right now, Russia and Ukraine. But it's really important for Taiwan to see in those long statements something about no change of the status quo. We hope for peace in the Taiwan Strait, and you got to work at that. You got to keep entertaining the foreign visitors, and I think we'll see a lot more of that in the coming years.
Martin,
I don't really have much to add to that, Gavin.
Well,
it pretty much covers my sentiments exactly.
Ross is brilliant. Anyway, on that note, we'll stop this part of the ICRT election coverage and come back in the 8 o'clock hour.